Recording.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Love Warrior, What Made Love Warrior a Best-Selling Memoir. And I'm Brooke Warner, and I'm with Linda Joy Myers. Hi, Linda.
Hi, and welcome, everybody. We're so glad to be here with you.
Yeah, and we're thrilled about the interest in these courses. We teach these best-selling memoir courses every spring and every fall, and so we have a real opportunity when these times come along to choose a new memoir. And lots of times it's something we want to read. Lots of times it's something that maybe is a little bit controversial. Lots of times it's an Oprah pick just because Oprah happens to make bestsellers. And this was one that we both came to because we kept hearing, you should read this book, you should read this book, you should read this book, until finally we both broke down and read it. And so we have lots to say about it. Definitely some, not all positive. I think we had some feelings about, what Glennon did well, and also things that she did that maybe shouldn't be replicated. And so I'm excited to dive into that. And then there's the part about writing a memoir that bears your soul and spares no one.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, we all as memoirists have to deal with the question of how much we're going to include, how much we're going to reveal deeply about ourselves, and of course about other people in our lives and our family. And this usually gets memoirists a little jangled one way or the other. But this is what memoir is all about, and we're going to, take a look at what Glennon did and hear from all of you tonight too.
Right, and we welcome questions. Go ahead and put your questions in the chat window, in the question window. Nice to see all of you. I always like to say hi, welcome to our students that we already know, welcome to new people. And since occasionally we do get new people on this call, we'll introduce ourselves. Linda, why don't you kick off?
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm the president and founder of the National Association of Memoir Writers. And I'm the author of a new memoir that bears some new material, Song of the Plains, which will be out this June. And my first memoir, Don't Call Me Mother, 2 books about how to write memoir, The Power of Memoir, and Journey of Memoir.
And I'm Brooke Warner. I'm the publisher of She Writes Press. I have a coaching practice called Warner Coaching, where I coach writers to publication. And I have a book out last year called Greenlight Your Book, which is largely about publishing, and then a few books about book publishing and memoir writing. What's your book? How to sell your memoir? And Linda Joy and I together have written Breaking Ground on Your Memoir, and we are the co-editors of The Magic of Memoir. So there's lots of memoir stuff. And I also like to preface this so that no one's surprised. We do these free webinars all the time, which we think are chock full of information, and we love the free, and you're always just invited to the free with no strings attached. But at the end, we do give you a little teaser of stuff that's coming up and things that we have in the works. So just want to plant that seed, but in the meantime, invite you to a good hour of learning, and don't hesitate to put the questions in as they come, and we will either take them or we'll save them for the end, and we'll have a robust Q&A at the end here.
Someone asked
all right.
me to say one thing. Someone asked if you needed to have read the book to understand this. The answer is no. We're going to be covering particulars in the book, a few, but also the larger arc of the book, the ideas of the book, and the challenges to write this kind of memoir. So hang in there with us, and it's going to be fun.
And we'll give some samples here and there, and maybe it will inspire you to read it, or maybe you'll decide at the end that you don't want to. So let's see how that goes. So the hard truths, how to share them, why to share them, and what the consequences are for you, the writer, and the story if you don't. This is a big one, and it's one that lots of memoirists struggle with, these questions of how to be authentic, how to share or not share, this question of will readers even know if you omit something, which Linda Joy is going to talk about in a second. It's interesting because with Love Warrior in particular, one of the things that I kept hearing from people who wanted me to read it was that Glennon is so honest. And some people felt that she was really authentic, and other people just thought that she was excessively honest. I do think that she's authentically her. And I thought that this was one of the most honest memoirs I've read in a really long time, almost to a fault, almost to the point of being well, certainly to the point of being uncomfortable at times. And one of the things that, because we both work with a lot of students and clients, is that people are scared to share the thing that is the most shameful thing in their lives. And sometimes they're family secrets, but in Glennon's case, it was actually about her marriage. And so the thing that is largely revealed in this book is about the fact that her husband cheats on her and is both watching porn behind her back and bringing it into her household, as she talks about quite a lot in the book, and then also actually cheating on her, you know, with real women and not just porn. So what she's struggling with, though, how I would say more so, well, I guess maybe on equal level with that, is her own sexuality. There's a lot in this book that is grappling with her lack of libido, her disinterest in sex. She even contemplates at some point if she may be asexual or even a lesbian, which is an interesting point because as it turns out now, she is with a woman. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the fallout. So I think, you know, in looking at Love Warrior and kind of what it is and, you know, her revealing of her secrets and shame, I wonder if she wrote this book just to sort of process her own feelings about why she was not really into her marriage and what happened. I think what's really fascinating is that her husband, Craig, had to have been on board for this kind of memoir. There's no way she could have written this without his, not necessarily happiness about it, but definitely his consent, because she really does out him. And if he wanted to sue for libel or character defamation, he could have if she hadn't gotten his permission, because of the level that she goes into about his discretions. So that's just something to consider, you know, if you're really writing about someone else's discretions. I think she holds herself accountable. And that's one thing that I really liked about her. You know, I think that she did a very good job of owning what was true for her. And sometimes memoirists don't do that enough. I find students that I work with oftentimes are willing to share that something happened, but then they don't take accountability. And it's the accountability that makes you feel like, oh, okay, this memoirist understands, this person, not just this memoirist, understands that something happened and there's ownership in that. You know, you're not just passing the buck to someone else. When it comes to the point of her likability, I mean, I think there's a really big question in memoir as to whether or not a person needs to be likable and what does that mean. I personally think that a memoirist does need to be likable. You can share your flaws and all of your ugly bits and still be a very likable narrator, and I think that Glennon mostly succeeds at that. I think she is mostly likable, but she is a little bit, there's a bit of her personality, the way I describe it is that she's kind of processing on the page a bit. I think that she can get into maybe even trying to justify to herself that things are okay when they're not. So there were a couple of moments that felt a little bit to me. And one of those I'll share for those people who read the book. I mean, this is on page 38, and it's when she first meets Craig. And I personally found this scene to be an unlikable moment. She is kind of judging the women that are at the bar, and she says at the top of the page, I conclude that these women are, in fact, bar crawl imposters. It is as if they were on their way to compete in a 4th of July beach volleyball tournament, but took a wrong turn and are currently awaiting rescue by their Olympic coach or perhaps their suntan oil sponsor. I want them to go away so I can stop longing and start forgetting that people like this exist. So it's nonsensical that I nudge Dana, gesture toward Craig, and say, remember him? So again, you have to be careful, you know, with anything that you're writing, I guess, in terms of how it's perceived to other people. And it's okay, actually, to judge other people, especially if that's part of your personality. But you do want to consider how that is going to feel to your reader. In moments of likability, I'll share a couple, and then we'll move on to Linda's points about omission. I think there's a lot of moments of likability, actually. She's very insightful. in lots of different moments. I think that she is extremely authentic and truth-telling about her shame. I found myself wishing that I had a PDF file so that I could search for the word shame and see how many times it comes up. But I thought she had insightful moments, like on page 96 and 97, when she talks about words and conversation, and she says, conversation is my building material, Craig's is sex. To know someone, to love and feel loved by her, he needs to touch her and be touched by her. And then she really goes on to describe the differences between them, you know, that she wants mental and intellectual connection and he wants physical connection, and in a lot of ways just how completely wrong for one another they are. And in that way, I think they mirror a lot of couples. You know, a lot of the people who wanted me to read this were my friends who felt that there were pieces of what she was saying that were true to their own experience. And I do think she struck a nerve with women who maybe feel like their partners want more physicality than they want. I certainly think that she writes well about that. And I also think she writes well about wanting to share her story and wanting to be seen, because the whole reason she blogs and puts all of these really intense things out in the world is her desperation for connection. And that's really palatable. I'll share this final example on 112, page 112, when she's revealing these 25 things about herself. And when she talks about her own words, she says, that's not my representative, that's the real me. And when she writes about what she types, she's talking about her fingers pounding the keys. They type juicy, dangerous, desperate sentences about marriage and motherhood and sex and life. It all pours out fast and furious, like the real me is gasping for air, like she's trying to get it out all at once in case she's never allowed to surface again. And I personally thought that was quite powerful. Okay, Linda Joy, you're going to segue you into, I'm going to let you handle my point here about whether readers can sense that something's missing.
Yes, well, true. I mean, I think readers do sense when something is missing, but they may wonder why, and may be frustrated at why they can't figure it out, which is sort of somewhat on the negative end, because then you've got your reader all distracted trying to figure out something that they can't figure out. But on the other hand, we all memoirists have the right and the choice to decide how much we are going to reveal, how much we're going to, like I say here, bring the lens in close, and how much to move it aside and move it away, move it back. And there's certain craft issues that, craft points that you need to have under your belt to help make these decisions. I mean, for one thing, I want to say that sometimes we write it all out with a lot of detail in our first draft, because that's, we're trying to figure out what happened, we're trying to figure out how we feel and how we think about things. But a first draft is not a book make, as everyone knows, I'm sure. And then there comes the layers and layers of choosing and crafting that draft into what might eventually become your memoir. So part of how you decide how direct to be is to ask yourself, what scenes really need to be right out there so the reader can see and feel it, so that they are, walking in my shoes as a character when I'm 9, when I'm 12, when I'm 30, whatever age you are, and what scenes need to be summarized, because everything in a memoir cannot possibly be in scene or would be 100,000 words long. So that there's elements of choice there, but like I say, we don't always necessarily make those choices or make what we might later decide are the correct choices or the best choices in your very, very first draft. So clearly, one technique I noticed that Glennon did use, she made choices about how much to include and how to write certain things. And I do have an example page, a brief one, because it's all the way through the book that she does this, but where there's more of kind of a summary scene of something happen rather than a full scene where we see and hear everybody. It's on page 68. She says, the next night, Craig and I sit with my parents and I tell them about the baby. They are at the same time weary and ready for battle. My mother looks past Craig directly at me and says, you do not have to marry him, Glennon. We can raise that baby ourselves. We can do this together. Now, they are in a scene and they are sitting on a couch in a living room, but we actually can't actually see them. I don't know what her parents look like. I don't even know what the room looks like. And most of the time in this book, I don't know what Craig looks like. Every so often, the husband, we get a description. Now, I don't think she's a sloppy writer. I think she decides how much exactly is needed in order to deliver the intent of any given moment that she decides to write about. She also uses a technique called summary to tell us, you know, for the next month I did thus and such. For the next 2 weeks, this is on page 162, I try to build my own bars with extra layers of clothing, turned back cold shoulders and scowls. She's trying to bar her husband out of her so she can't feel them. I feel the need to protect myself by being distant and nasty so Craig will be constantly aware of my pain. So she talks about what she does over a 2-week period, and then she drops into a specific scene by saying, one Sunday morning in June, I walk into the kitchen and find Craig making breakfast. This is on the next page, 163. So the elements, the usual elements of craft are used here, as we all need to draw upon them in terms of moving in, moving out, coming close, and distancing. When you can have intimacy with the reader, even if you're summarizing by using tools like specificity, like a particular details, like the outfit that you're wearing and how it feels on your body and how different it felt the last time you wore it. Things like that show an inner state but using outer descriptive details can be very helpful. You're going to be making decisions for both craft and emotional reasons always and all the way through. Again, these descriptions and characterizations, if you want to bring somebody close, you slow down your pacing. Pacing is another whole issue. You slow down your pacing and you offer slowed down specific observations and details and then reactions, which we call reflection here on the slide, about those details. And so time seems to slow down and we've fallen deeper into a single scene rather than rushing across, the things that are happening. So now, what did she leave out other than using these particular craft tools? Well, I think she chose exactly how much and what to show of her parents. Her sisters were named and described as children, and then as adults she would say, my sister called, and we don't even know which one. There are no doubt reasons she had for this, and at times I said, well, gosh, I wish I knew which sister it was, but because it could be a different sister each time, you just get the feeling that her sisters, plural in general as a group, are there for her, but you don't necessarily get a sense of particularity. Around the parents, we see them a little bit, particularly when the children she's younger. Later they become like monolithic of the parents, and later in the book, about the last third, they aren't mentioned at all. So for whatever reason, they weren't either endemic to the story or she'd mentioned them enough in order to achieve the goal that she had. These things I noticed, they didn't particularly bother me, but I did notice that she absolutely was making choices all the way through. Brooke?
Right. And that's an important point. You know, you get to intentionally omit, but you also, it's a really interesting thing because she's so forthcoming that there's these places where I wanted a bit more too around where did all of this discomfort in herself and her body and her sexuality and stuff stem from, and clearly it's from her upbringing. I also know that she's quite religious, or at least was quite religious, and that is in the book. But it's also, she grapples with it a bit, and I think there are places that she emphasizes a lot and places that she kind of speeds over that might have merited a little bit more and been more helpful. So this question of how to tackle dark themes and the balance a memoirist or memoir must strike when you're sharing the intimate details of your sometimes messy life. Everybody has a messy life in some ways. Everyone has stuff that they're processing, and it's the thing that often brings us to memoir is to sort that out, and it's perfect. I think that should be fodder for memoir. In lots of ways, the secrets and the shame and the dark stuff is fuel. And Linda Joy and I in our longer course teach a lot about the balance between the light and the dark and how important that is, because if you only are grappling with the dark topics, people are going to feel the heaviness of that. And some memoirs have that, and some memoirs can be successful with that. I do think that this is an interesting memoir because it's so much about sex and this sexuality and the relationship between a man and a wife and a marriage. Inevitably, there are higher moments, but of course there is drug addiction, there is bulimia. There's a lot of really tough stuff that she deals with in this memoir. And so if you were just looking at it from the outset of what are the themes, you could have eating disorders, and you could have drug addiction, and you could have sexuality issues and cheating in a marriage. They're mostly difficult. And yet I do think that she strikes a nice balance with the memoir because she does have quite a lot of inspiration in here. And the book is called Love Warrior, you know, so you get the sense that she is going to fight for it, and she is fighting for it. And in fact, I really like how she ends the book, which is this speculation. You know, I don't know if Craig and I are going to make it or not, but all that really matters is, you know, that I'm okay. And she has that a lot. I mean, I would say it's a very pro-woman book, and when all is said and done, you know, despite all of this stuff that she's struggling with her self-image. And in some ways, I would say that as a role model, it's problematic, you know. But on the other hand, I think the sharing of the shame and the forthcomingness with it and the willingness to just completely go for it and talk about it is really freeing and helpful to other women. I did want to just read this sentence from the afterwards. She says, specifically about what I just said about, you know, whether she and Craig will end up together. I do not know whether we will spend our lives married or loving each other from a distance, but I now know the path of the love warrior. I will not betray myself. I will trust the wisdom of the still small voice. I will not let fear drown her out. I will trust her, and I will love myself. There's a lot in this book about that, you know, this fight for just being true to self. And I really think that's admirable, and I think it's what a lot of people like about her book. And a few of you have put into the question window, just browsing through, you know, just about a couple of things that I think are important to point out. One is about her level of hindsight and what she's bringing to the page, just in terms of what she could have known when. That is a narrative technique, and it's absolutely yours for the taking. I think it's quite impressive that she does this in the first person. Sorry, not first person. I mean present tense. Memoirs are all first person. I usually dissuade some of my students from writing in the present tense because I think it's a very difficult tense to reflect in, and it's a difficult tense to do takeaway in. But she does it really effectively, and she has lots of takeaway, which we're going to teach in the 4-week class. And she also has lots of innate wisdom and things to share I would imagine that some people think it's overkill because she does, like I said earlier, quite a lot of processing of her own emotions and feelings about things. That said, I also thought it was handled adeptly. I never felt that it was that she jumped me or jarred me out of the scene when she brought in these reflective and insightful hindsights. And you are allowed to do that. You're allowed to have different narrative voices that infuse the memoir. And in our long class, we're constantly talking about the fact that it's the writer's responsibility to explain to the reader where they are emotionally. So I say to my students, you are the barometer for your reader's emotions. And if you're not telling us how you feel about things, then we're going to be inserting our own feelings about how we might feel about your experience. So the way that Glennon does quite a lot of this is how I feel, this is how I feel, this is how I feel, for me, as a personal preference, I like that. I think that some readers might feel that it's heavy-handed, and there are moments in here that I do think it's heavy-handed, but for the most part, I actually think it was quite effective, and it helped me know exactly where she was and how she was feeling about things, because there was still a lot of scene. And so when we get into this difference between honesty and overkill, you know, like what was the overkill? And she just, to the point I was making earlier, you know, she talks a lot about her shame and a lot about, you know, just how shameful things are. She definitely has moments, I think, of being a little heavy-handed with Craig. I mean, certainly we can feel her anger, and maybe we feel judgment, maybe we feel mad at him. But I ended up oddly feeling sorry for him, which was not how I wanted to feel. You know, I wanted to be like, well, here's this cheater and this, you know, I wasn't sure if she was trying to be more sympathetic or not sympathetic to him. And I wondered if that was overkill because she was so on this tirade about how weak and awful he was. And I think she might have played that hand a little bit too heavily. And then given this experience that, you know, she has now left her husband and is in a relationship with a woman, I also found this whole scene difficult to read about whether or not she might be a lesbian. You know, of course, that's in retrospect, you know, and maybe she was trying to process that. But knowing what I know now, some of that was difficult to deal with. You know, she was kind of discussing whether she may be sorry, the word is escaping me.
Oversexed, undersexed?
Oh, no, yes, asexual. Thank you.
Yeah. There we go.
So anyways, there's lots of stuff between honesty and overkill. You know, it's like, was she just processing that because she wasn't aware of those emotions and they were trapped underneath the surface? You know, we can't know, but we can speculate. And then I want to just put a warning here about beware of the trauma Olympics and what is that, you know, because I used to read a lot of proposals, and I still do, just less than I used to when I worked for Seal Press. And book proposals can sometimes take on this tone of, here's all these awful things that happened to me, and it does come off as like a litany of horrible things. And Glennon could have been that person. You know, she could have been like, I was a drug addict, and I was bulimic, and I have sexual problems, and my husband cheated on me. But I doubt that was how the proposal read. I really believe that the cover copy is something really good to look at when you're trying to think about what a book is and when you're thinking about your hard themes or the themes that you're balancing. And when you read her jacket copy, there is obviously despair and sadness in there, but it specifically mentions the healing. It's the story of the healing that is possible for any of us when we refuse to settle for good enough and begin to face pain and love head on. And I do think that's what this book is about. And so just be careful in terms of how you frame your own work, that instead of trying to be the trauma Olympics, you turn that around, even if you have a lot of trauma, and make it about what is the redemption inside all of those difficult things that you've gone through in your life.
Yeah, that's what the reader is looking for, because readers read memoir and not because you're famous. If you are, even Glennon, she is famous, but a lot of people ran into her book or read it not knowing how famous she really was, but wanting to try to find a way to work out issues in their life about perhaps about marriage, about faithfulness, about bulimia and other things. So, you know, most of us, quote, ordinary people are telling a story also that has a lot of specifics about us, but it's a universal, there are universal themes and elements in it. So the fallout, oh boy, I've been teaching memoir for over 20 years, and this is the first question most people ask, or second at least, is like, what will happen when my family finds out I'm writing a memoir, et cetera, et cetera. So the repercussions are everything that people are afraid of, both internally from what they know about their family to imagining the worst case scenario and not knowing, you know, not necessarily knowing if there can be a more positive outcome or new conversations as a result of what they end up revealing. And of course, every memoir is different, and I think the biggest issue that we and I have run into are when people are writing about events in the family that no one else knew about, are revealing secrets, are revealing issues about trauma, perhaps abuse, certain kinds of abuse in the family that either the family did know about and were silent about, or didn't have any idea. And all of this is the human condition, and this happens all the time, and we run into this all the time. So each person writing the memoir needs to decide what they're going to do, but what we find is that the cart gets put before the horse really, really fast. People will say, well, if my family finds out that I'm publishing this book about X and Y and Z, they will never speak to me again, so therefore I can't write it. And we tell them, slow down, back up. You don't have to tell them you're doing it while you're doing it. If you've already told them you're writing a memoir, then you kind of set out like a red flag across there and hung it on your doorway. You can take that flag down and say, well, I'm taking some writing classes. I'm learning a lot about writing. I'm not quite sure how it's going to turn out, which will actually be the truth, because when we start writing, what we think we're going to write isn't usually what we end up writing exactly. A story takes on a life of its own. A memoir evolves over time, and we see this over and over again, from where we think we're going to where we need to go. And I always suggest, Brooke and I both suggest, that you keep some privacy blinders around your own process, at least long enough so that you know what you think, what you feel. You can gather the guts of your own story and get it on the page without being distracted by all these worries about what somebody else is going to say. We've also seen premature sharing, even when people are in a group. They'll say, well, I just wanted my sister to know how I felt after all these years, and they send their work to their sister, who it turns out has an entirely different view of the family than the writer, and ends up defending someone or attacking someone else, or utterly confusing the poor writer about what she should do next. And so it's okay to write privately for a period of time, even about things that might ultimately become public. And the idea is, get a first draft down before you make all these other decisions that will affect your family and your family life and holidays and everything else. So the other thing is, some people feel more comfortable making a lot of things public, and Glennon was one of those people. I mean, I don't know her, but I mean, it appears that she felt comfortable writing about her sex life and her bulimia, some of it with the lens up very, very close, that you can feel the cold porcelain toilet bowl on your own forehead. And other times it was a little more distant, and but she reveals a lot. There's how she feels during sex, how she feels during looking at some pornography, and so on. So these are what we call risky edges, and really there is no, I mean, I come back to the trauma Olympics thing. sometimes there's I'm going to see if I can reveal more than these other people, because now suddenly on Facebook and everywhere else, it's like the more you reveal, the better it is. That is not necessarily true, and I think each of us needs to honor our own individual limits and ability to reveal private details. So I'll give an example from myself. We see this with our students all the time, but I've been through it in 2 memoirs. In my first memoir, Don't Call Me Mother, it's a story of 3 generations of mothers who abandoned their daughters and how I coped with it as a child. It's in a child's point of view, and it's a coming-of-age story. But there was also the problem with men, including my father, and there was a scene where he became very touchy-feely, to say the least, in a motel room with me when I had not seen him for several years, and I was 15 by then. And in my first book, I just didn't feel comfortable at the very last edits. I waited until it had to pretty much go to the printer before I made these final decisions about how close the lens should be in that scene. And I softened the lens, and I did it by summarizing a bit and making it shorter. It was clear what was happening, but that's what I decided to do. Another thing I left out was some specific naming about sexual abuse with one of my uncles, because the only family I had left was this Iowa family, and I had a feeling that if I revealed these things to that family that I would lose them. And nobody else was left. I didn't have anyone else left in my family. So I didn't. It turns out a lot of people figured it out. It was odd. I must have given some clues. But in my new memoir, A, a lot of those people died already, and B, I don't care anymore. But the fact that they're dead is illegal, helpful legally. But I revealed that information and how it came to be what it was in the context of that family. And in my father's motel room scene, it's again a scene in the book, but it's much longer this time because I'm looking at how, as an adult, I understand that child sexual abuse and other kinds of abuse affects not only ourselves, but the generations that come after us, and how we're carrying these elements of trauma. There's new research now how we carry it in our DNA. And I was making a much bigger point, so I put it all in. So those were my choices and why I made them, but I did think it all through and went back and forth and had an editor and, just decided where I could be comfortable. So another place where you're going to get blowback is in reviews, and family and friends, to whatever degree people decide to say things to you like, aren't you over that yet? Which is what they said to me quite a lot. Various things that show that someone doesn't understand the kind of story you're writing. So these things are all decisions that you will come to in your own time, including when and how to tell your family. But we highly recommend you wait and you have your own voice be strong and your own story be clear inside you before you go out into the public risk area. Anything to add, Brooke?
Right. No, all good points. And we can hear what people are saying too. I think there's tons and tons of questions, so I think we will move on to Q&A, and we have a whole 4-week class for those of you who want more conversation on this. So we're going to share briefly here about the stuff that's coming up. As I mentioned, we do these to share what we have going on, and this one in particular I'm really excited about. Turn up the dial on your memoir, and then we'll get to Q&A in just a second. This is next Friday, and it's a $39 day. So if you're looking for some of this specific stuff, scene writing, platform building, there was a question or two in the Q&A panel here about selling memoir, and is memoir particularly difficult to sell? The answer is it definitely can be, and Jenny Ferrari Adler is a New York agent who's going to come and talk about what captures the attention of agents. And then character and character development, finding the heart of your memoir with Julie Barton, who's a New York Times bestselling author. Linda Joy and I are both teaching about topics near and dear to our heart, and everything is recorded. So we invite you, you'll get the downloads and the slides, so hopefully it will be well worth the $39. And then a couple more things. We have tonight's class is always, these free ones always lead into a 4-week class. And they're always $75 for the first day. So they'll be $75 through tomorrow, and then it goes up to $89. So you can save a little bit of money and join us for the 4-week class. We're covering a lot of good stuff. And for those of you who have a lot of more in-depth questions, they're a little more, because there are fewer people, tonight we had almost 200 people on here. The classes are a little bit more intimate. So we have a theme. We're doing narrative voice. So for Kimberly specifically, we're asking about hindsight, or people who are asking about showing versus telling. That's going to be handled in the narrative class. And then there's reflection and takeaway, and always we teach that because it's so integral to memoir, and not enough people do it, or if they do it, they don't do it well enough. And I think it's particularly interesting that Glennon has so much good reflection and takeaway in here. As I said, because she's writing in the present tense, I thought that was quite skilled. And then bearing it all, a little bit more on how to do that, why to do it, and a little bit more about the fallout, and specifically, Glennon's particular fallout, kind of what happened with her, and is that helpful? Is that good publicity? Maybe, but she was already pretty famous before all this happened. And then, of course, our 6-month class, you can get a $200 discount if you sign up tonight. So take a look at that as well if you're interested in the long course. It's way intensive. It's much more intimate even than the 4-week class. There's lots of sharing and one-on-one and lots of mentorship. So if you're even have an inkling of interest about that, just shoot us an email and let us know. We can talk to you about it on the phone. We can answer your questions. And the 6-month class starts in June. And we are actually anticipating that we may well sell out tonight. So if you're interested, don't sit on it too long. Send us an email and let us know.
Like you said, there's some people with questions about particular craft things that we went over here, and we go very deeply into every possible craft nook and cranny on the 6-month course, along with the kind of feedback you get through our mentoring, which is for every class on your work specifically. So it really helps you. I've seen a lot of, we both have, haven't we, Brooke, seen people make huge changes in their writing once they understand the craft better.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's a game changer for sure. And that's a great segue. I'll leave these slides up for the links. And because one of the first questions that Kimberly asked is, how can I write a memoir that doesn't come across as narcissistic? Me, I. And I totally think that reflection and takeaway is one of the key ways to do that, and it's why I'm so obsessed with it, and it's why I'm teaching my whole hour next time on takeaway, because I think it's the place where people turn outward, and it's really, really powerful. And I have lots of examples in Glennon's book, so let me search for that while Linda Joy takes the next question. Hang on, here's one.
I'm looking for there's a lot of them. So I was at the end, so let me get back to the front end here.
Well, let me read this one to you. Why don't you take this one? Susan says, I am stuck in this place of writing about my experiences that are about abuse, but I want to honor the people that I want to remain nameless. How do you do this?
Right, exactly. I understand totally. I had that problem also. Well, for one thing, you can change all names. You may end up writing your first draft with real names, because I think it helps us create scenes and characterization of people if we use names, but they can either they can be changed, and it's not fiction. We don't call people who write a memoir and then change the name, we don't call it fiction. We call it a memoir, and it's very common to do that. The Trauma is part of the story, but probably not the whole story. Everybody's percentages are different around that. So you write the dark moments, the darker moments, and you make sure that you include in full scenes so people can feel and see them, the lighter, happier, more beautiful moments where you learn something, where there's something that you take with you for the rest of your life that's positive from these same people. I had to struggle with that a lot. I grew up with a lot of abuse, but I also grew up with a grandmother who taught me and gave me enough things that I could have the life that I have now. But it was very brutally delivered at times. So in both of my books, I had to also be sure and balance the dark and the light, because readers don't want to feel overly abused either. So it is something that we're always dealing with, I think, as memoir writers, particularly if we have stories about trauma.
Right. Great answer. So here, Kimberly and everyone, just to show something where this is where Glennon, who has written a memoir that is obviously very much about her and is very much about her marriage and her suffering, writes about pain. It's on page 131, and this is an example of a takeaway, which is outward writing, which is when you write in the memoir and you turn it outward so that it's not just about you. She writes, pain splits us in two. When someone who is suffering says, I'm fine, it's not because she is fine. It is because her inner self told her outer self to say the words, I am fine. Sometimes she will even slip and say, we're fine. Others assume she's referring to herself and her people, but she is not. She is referring to both of herselves, her hurt self and her representative, the one fit for public consumption. And she goes on. And she has lots of moments like this where she's writing about all women, or just in general about experiences of emotions that she has that are not specific to her, but that it might be specific to anyone. And that's one way to move away from writing about something so me-focused.
Mm-hmm. I have a question here. So many memoirs and nonfiction sound like blog posts pieced together. Yeah, we've noticed that too. How do we get to a place where it sounds like less like a Facebook post and more flow? Well, I'll answer it, and also we do cover this a lot in our courses. But there's an arc to a story. There's a feeling of beginning, middle, and end. There's often the sense that there are 3 acts in which each act evolves the story to another level, a deeper level, a more particular level. And at the end, there's some kind of, ending, resolution of some kind. It doesn't have to be happily ever after. So when people learn about structure and arc and how to create that, it doesn't have as much of a fragmented feel. Some people want to have a fragmented set of stories, but from what I understand, Brooke, those are a little harder to sell essay-like pieces than.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, there's a question about what's commercial and what makes for a commercial memoir, and what is more literary. I mean, these are other kinds of questions that we could get into, but certainly that's different from, just strung together blog posts, which should be avoided at all costs. And there are 2 questions that came in about how could Glennon's husband sue her, and why would consent be necessary if it's your story. In this case, she goes beyond her story. She absolutely talks in great depth about his porn consumption and his infidelities. So she absolutely had to get his consent to be able to publish his real name. And if they had a very contentious divorce and he had said, no, you can't do this, I guarantee you that she would have published a different, under a different name. And so there are some disguising elements that people can do. And in terms of your story, yes, absolutely, it's your story, and you can tell what's true for you. The only thing you have to be worried about in book publishing is defamation. So if a person can argue that you defamed them, and that it impacts their capacity to get work. I mean, these are all legal arguments, and I'm not saying that Craig even could have won a lawsuit, but I'm just saying that there is stuff in here that absolutely breaches someone else's privacy, and I am absolutely convinced that he signed off on it. And it's about their marriage, and in the end of the book, when she published it, they were still together. So, and he was clearly supportive of her writing. Throughout the book, you see that he even is jealous of her at some points, because he says to her, you get to write on your blog and have all of these thousands of people supporting you, and he's kind of rueful about that, as if he would like to have something like that. So it's just interesting.
Yeah, the legal issues are, if you're worried about legal issues in your own story and it's keeping you from writing, you should contact a literary attorney and ask them the questions that are bugging you, so that you can clear out a space for you to write your story. And some people need to do it that way.
But first, write it without fear. I would argue, that you don't have to worry about that. To Linda Joy's point earlier about not putting the cart before the horse, write the story and then see if it needs to get vetted. I have lots of authors on She Writes Press who have written pretty intense stories, memoirs about ex-husbands who were abusive and all kinds of things that they've been worried about, and they have not had to have them vetted, but they did need to change their names and change identifying details. So there's lots of good ways around it. Okay. Do you see a question that you wanted to take, Linda, or do you want me to read some?
Yeah, well, somebody's asking, how do you write a memoir? Chronologically, scenes as they come to you, or by theme? Yes.
All of the above.
Yeah, all of the above. Some techniques that we teach have to do with finding the significant moments or turning points around which to build some kind of structure. Sometimes you need to write chronologically. If it's coming of age, usually they're chronological. But what most people do is write scene, write a few scenes, or write quite a lot of scenes, and maybe they are thematic scenes, and let the story evolve so you can see it on the page. If it's in your head, you can't even tell what you have, and it's just important to get things on the page so you can, so you can actually see it. Start today.
Right, good advice. Okay, and let's see, I actually already answered that one about this interesting, I will take on actually this question of showing and telling. Kimberly asked neutrally, do we think she's showing instead of telling, or telling instead of showing? I do think she does both. She absolutely shows, because she writes a lot of scenes that are very much all of the elements of showing that we teach. And in Linda Joy's scene writing class that will be on the Turn Up the Dial next week, scene writing is all showing. And there's other kinds of telling that that starts happening both in reflection and also in narrative summary. But all are necessary to write a good memoir. And so there's a balance. Sometimes in our long course, we teach that it's like 60-40 on the show tell, or 70-30 on the show tell. But the notion that you would write an entire memoir with no telling is like, for the reader, that would be like pounding their head against the wall, because sometimes I see these things that it's like someone submits something to me that's like, 10 pages of just dialogue. And that is all showing, but I find myself, just completely bored, or, wishing for the writer to interject some interesting other kinds of materials in there that would be, sometimes more telling, particularly if it's a reflection. So you absolutely want to find your best way to integrate everything, and certainly both showing and telling.
Somebody, I can't find the question, but somebody asked about what if your story covers a 60-year span? And I think this is a really good question. And wouldn't you need to include your childhood in a story that's about trauma and abuse? So the answer is it's not a problem, and there's a lot of ways to do it. You could do it in a forward movement, thematically oriented way, or you could do a framed memoir, particularly about trauma. People want to know that they know you survived or you wouldn't be writing the story, but they want to know that you're okay so they can bear some of those moments with you more easily. So if you start with the now scene, for instance, I'm just giving an example, of you're with your family, blah, 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 you've healed, worked through a lot of things, whatever you are, then you can use a series of flashbacks mixed with now, or just drop back and go forward into how things evolved and how you got through it, and end in the now. So there's a lot of ways to structure a story like that, but do not be deterred by the idea that you may need to pick and choose some thematically important moments across the 60-year period and lay it out as part of your structure.
Right. I just want to take a couple of logistical questions because there's been several here about the 6-month class. So we capped the class at 14 students because someone asked how big is it, and then there's a question about with whether the attendees get to meet one another, and we do introduce each other online. So we don't meet in person, but it's fully online. You hear each other. There's a private Facebook group so you can see and chat with one another inside the class. So if you have specific questions about that, let me know. And then someone asked, do you mentor men? And yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, both of us work with men. My press is women only, and we tend to do a lot of women's stuff and have a lot of female students, but men are welcome, and men absolutely take our class and love it.
I want to mention a program at the National Association of Memoir Writers this Friday that's by a man for men, Jed Diamond, and you can find out more about that presentation on namw.org. But we're focusing on the problem with men and memoir and personal sharing. So take a look.
Right. Perfect. And then Jing said, is there a memoir that the 6-month class is focused on? And the answer is no. So that class is not focused on a book like tonight's class. We use some examples of books, but it's really a more broad-based approach to craft and process, and it's really about getting you writing. So just to explain how that's a bit different.
Yeah, and we give a lot of examples using books, and we make a lot of recommendations of what you can read, though, but it's not focused on one book.
Right. So there's there's 2 interesting questions. Somehow, to me, seem like they're in the same vein because they're sort of about the rules of memoir. And one is about a woman here is saying that she is writing her book in the 3rd person. And if you would comment on that, I mean, she's doing it, so that's that is what it is. But we can say what we think about memoir and first person. And then also, does it take away from a memoir if you use a pen name?
Oh, okay. You take the pen name, and I'll take this one.
Okay.
So the rules. Well, you can always break the rules, but I noticed in the question you said it reads like a novel. I just want to address that little piece for a second. When you write using good craft choices and good characterization and dialogue and reflection and takeaway and all the things that make a memoir really reach out to other people, your memoir will read as if it is a novel, meaning that it will have a broad-based readership, and the storytelling will be excellent. So, I mean, I think that's what people mean by reads like a novel. So that's a good thing to aim to be able to do. Most memoirs are, I'd say 90-some% are written in first person because they are that person's story. They are telling their own story. And some people question about the third person, and you can experiment. You might have already experimented with I versus she or he. But sometimes it seems more intimate to say I or more distant to say she. On the other hand, there are times when it really helps to have a third-person voice reflecting on the I. So it's a craft it's more like how are you handling it craft-wise than whether there's any one particular rule. Mostly, you don't want the reader to be all caught up in your style and lose your story. So if your style and your story work together super well, there's probably not a problem.
Right. And we're almost out of time, so I want to make sure to address, well, I'll take the pen name thing as quickly as possible, but Sylvia also had an important question I thought about, where are the stories from people of color? And, you know, this is a topic that I think about a lot, and I think it's absolutely true because she's basically saying, you know, Glennon is this privileged woman and she's getting this book deal, and you could look at, you know, the string of best-selling memoirists out there, and a lot of them are privileged white women. Why does that happen is one question, and whose responsibility is it to publish other kinds of voices is another question. So, you know, I'm not going to get too political here, but, you know, book publishing definitely does have a problem with this, and you know there's a handful of breakout best-selling memoirists each year, but there's by people of color, but I think there's a perception on the publishing industry's part that the only people who are going to read those books are people of color, which is just so wrong. You know, so they end up getting very marginalized, and then you might have the occasional breakout book. And in the magic of memoir, we were very, very conscientious about trying and working to include memoirists of color, and I think we did a decent job with that. So we had Raquel Cepeda and Daisy Hernandez and Margot Jefferson and Azar Nafisi. But it's an important question to keep bringing up, and I appreciate it, Sylvia, because I think it will make Linda Joy and I look to see, you know, might we teach a memoirist of color next time around. So just wanted to let you know that you planted the seed. So thank you, everyone, and we will hope we cannot tackle all of these amazing questions tonight, which is too bad. And it's always good fodder for Twitter and Facebook. Please find us online. If there was a question that you really wanted us to answer, you can email, you can put it on Facebook, which we appreciate because then it inspires bigger and broader conversations than just email. And we hope to see you at one of these events that is coming up in the next couple weeks.
Mm-hmm. And there is a recording you all will get at the end.
Yes, we will be sending recordings of everything. Recordings of tonight will come tomorrow, recordings of all sessions for Love Warrior, the 6-month class, Turn Up the Dial. So if you're out of town and can't make one class or, you know, really want to benefit from the day but can't be there, don't worry. We record, we give slides. We're very generous with the materials, and we understand that not everyone can work around our schedules. So thank you, everyone, and thanks, Linda Joy.
Yes, thank you, and thank you all so much for being here and for all your really, really great questions. See you in another class. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Good night.